Alright, let's move on to the eyes now. So we've got our pencil here. Let's zoom in a bit. Now with the eyes, what I'll do is I'll quickly draw one. Okay, now what's going on with this eye is this part here, all around this, is skin, obviously. This part inside is the eyeball. So the eyeball actually comes, if this is the brow here, the eyeball is actually reasonably, let's try that again. I'll clean this up for you in a second. Reasonably big. So if I get my eraser, so for the eyeball, this is what we're looking at. Okay? And that's sitting in the head, in the eye socket, which on the skull is, if we go back to the skull, and where is he here? See, this is where the eyeball sits, in here like this. And you can see this is the brow here, and then we get our skin over like that. Okay? So, now, keeping in mind that this is a ball, we don't have this. Okay? Because this is a round object, the skin that is on top of it needs to follow the curves. So, we get this curved form. Generally speaking, the upper eyelid there is more curved than the lower eyelid from a front-on view. Okay? So what I'll just do is we'll knock this guy down just a little bit. Okay. So if the eye is looking down, for example, and we'll do the same thing, we'll draw a circle. What we tend to have is the bottom eyelid and the top eyelid becomes almost straight, or sometimes even curved, depending on the angle. Like so. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's a bit of thickness. So along here, if you're looking on these extreme angles like this, and it's close up, there is definitely some thickness along here. Okay, you won't see it so much from this direct front view because it's front on, but it is there. Okay, so you know, you could add a little hint of it in if you wanted to. Now, where up here, where it starts to meet the brow, we get a fold of skin. So the eyelid wants to do this, but there's a little bit of that brow stopping it. So what we get is a shape like this. Okay, which is what I've done here, and we would put our brow, yeah, probably in here like this if we were putting it on there. But I'm not too worried about the brow for now. In fact, let's completely get rid of this one. And again, so if I was doing an eye with the opposite extreme, one day I will learn to draw circles. We'll just pretend that I know how to do it for now. Alright, so what we would have is a really extreme curve on that upper lid, and then probably the lower lid would be like this. And then we would have on this upper one, we'd be able to see that thickness. And let's just clean this guy up a bit. And we would get something like that. Okay, so next, what we want to do is we want to draw that eye turning. So now what happens is, as we turn the head, exactly the same as the mouth, the corners of the eyes curve back with the curve of the head. So when we turn, we're going to see less of them. You know, let's do it even more extreme. Now, I wouldn't say this is a completely side-on eye, but we're starting to get there. But you can see how this side is now hidden behind here. So it would be kind of like this. That's the part that would be hidden. And a completely side-on eye is much more of a shape like this. Like so. Okay, so the eye is actually not that hard to draw. Okay, now keeping in mind obviously that when you draw the eyes you have to have enough space in between them and stuff like that. It's actually pretty easy part of the head to draw. So I'm going to quickly move on to the ear while we're here, finish off the facial features. So the basic shape of an ear is like this, and this is from a completely side-on head. So what we have here is we have skin comes up like this, it comes down, and probably about halfway starts to curve in like this. Okay, then down the bottom here we have this bit here, goes into the lobe. Now in behind here we have a little, that's where the ear hole is. Okay, pretty easy so far. And then we have this fold in here in our ears, which is like this. Now obviously this is just a standard ear. You know, some people might have bigger earlobes or what have you. They might, you know, have more rounded ears, more squared ears, whatever. But the important thing are the inside lines here. Now I'm going to go through, draw a couple more times, and we'll really get the hang of how to draw these. But something to keep in mind is when you're drawing heads, especially from a distance, this information isn't necessarily needed to be accurate. You want to hint at it, okay? You want to fool the person's mind into filling in the details for you, okay? So for example, if I was to draw this guy smaller, okay, that's pretty much what I need, which is pretty much that. But I can also just do that, which is nowhere near enough or nowhere near as much detail, but it still looks like an ear. Okay, I can also again, that looks like an ear. I pretty much just scribbled in there. So don't be too hung up on getting these details exact, but you know, it's good if you can have an understanding of what's in there and how it does look, you know, just in case you need to draw it up close. So again, let's break this down. This guy comes about halfway and starts to come in. Sometimes this part will come back in before it goes out. In fact, let's draw this up a bit higher. Then we have, and again, we just have to indicate this. And I'll talk more about this later, but for now we just need to indicate it like that. Alright, so I'll just do this guy with a pen. And you can see we have our ear. Okay, so you could, you could chuck in that other line and what have you, but you don't need to. So let's start turning the ear now, okay? Just quickly, let's just neaten this up. We start turning the ear. Let's do a completely front on. So this is the side of the head here, and this is where the ear comes out. Like this. So from behind, what this would look like, we have our ear coming out like this. And then we have this little bit of skin, little bit of our ear that attaches there. So you would see something like this from behind. We'll have our hair like so. Okay. Now from the front, again, our ear looks exactly the same as this. What we have to decide now is what parts of this we can see and what parts we can't. Now, this part here is obviously a very important part. So we'll chuck that in. Then this part here is important as well. Can't go without that, but obviously we're not going to be able to see this big thing here. I think some of it's probably going to be obscured like that. And there we have our ear from the front. Now obviously, I put a lot of detail into that, but like I said before with this one up here, you don't need to. Some scribbles, depending on how close you are. Some scribbles will do to portray what you need to portray. Okay, that looks like an ear. That looks like an ear. You can see what I'm getting at. Okay. Alright, there we go. There we have the ear and the eye.